Welcome to the Heart Centered Life podcast, a podcast that helps you cultivate a life where intellect, emotion, and intuition align. Each week, we bring you tools, resources, or guests to help you find that space where your true happiness resides and encourage you to meet the world's deep hunger from that place. Because we truly believe that when your deep happiness meets the world's deep hunger, miracles happen. I'm your host, Elena Boyd. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Heart Centered Life podcast. We, as many of our listeners know, are a podcast about living and leading from the place where intuition, intellect, and emotions align. And ultimately, we want to help people come to their place of deep happiness so that they can then meet the world's deepest hunger. Because what we believe, and this is something we really believe in our hearts, is that miracles happen in that space where our deep happiness meets the world's deep hunger. And in that line, today we have with us a really special guest, PJ, who is here to talk to us about the importance of living in the presence. So that's Presence, the presence. And then that's where a lot of miracles happen. So, PJ, thank you for your time, and we are honored to have you be a guest in this episode.
Alina, it is 100% my honor and privilege and pleasure to be here with you and with your audience.
Oh, thank you, PJ. PJ, I read your bio, and you have such an impressive background. You've been a motivational speaker for most of your life. You are a result-oriented international transformational coach. You enjoy sailing, outdoor skydiving. You do indoor skydiving. You do all kinds of physical activity. And yet you are also a wheelchair athlete, which is really impressive. And you also have a black belt in martial arts.
Yes.
You teach women self-defense. You teach meditation. You are a published author. What led you to accomplish so many things? And that's not including founding 2 nonprofit organizations. And you've done so much. Can you tell us a bit about your background and what led you to live life so fully?
Absolutely. For me, I just want to be alive. So one thing that the audience may not know is that I'm a disabled man. I'm in a wheelchair. And I have a very serious form of muscular dystrophy that was expected to take my life at the age of 7. And I haven't actually, that's not what I wanted to say. I was expected to take my life by 7. And the thing about my life is that I have always wanted to live, right? It's just, I love life.
Yeah.
I enjoy adventure. I enjoy sights and sounds and tastes and smells. And so despite what doctors said, I've lived 40 plus years, longer than I was supposed to. And it comes back to one thing. Like, I just want to live. I want to live another 100 years or more at this point. And when I tell people that, people say, well, that's crazy. Like, when we get old, they're like, I only want to be like 65 and no older than 70, because you just get old and you start to fall apart. And I'm like, It's 2020. I've got 20 more years before anything like that
Right.
happens, And
Exactly.
what's going to happen medically and technologically and scientifically between now and then that's going to reverse aging or stop aging or allow me to become physically stronger again? So there's only about, when I was in the 8th grade, there were only about 25 people in the world that had what I had. And the reason I say had what I have is because I don't know if they're still alive. I don't know how
Right.
many people are in the world right now that have what I have. So if I had to have something, I got something cool, right? Something really like unusual and
Unique.
interesting.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And see, that's the position that I come from. I come from this place where I have an option to live life the way I want to. In March of 2019, I caught some kind of virus, very similar, I think, to COVID, actually. And I lost about 85% of my physical strength and close to 50% of my lung capacity, which obviously could be very detrimental to some people. And a year later, I was having lunch with some friends, and they were saying, "Well, why aren't you upset? Why aren't you more frustrated? Why aren't you sad or scared? How is it that you're still upbeat and positive?" And I said, "Because those other things don't feel good, right? It doesn't feel
Right.
good to be sad or disappointed or frustrated or scared or worried. None of that feels good. And if I use my mind skillfully, as they might say in Buddhism, if I use my mind skillfully and I go, I don't like how that feels, then I go, okay, what would I rather feel instead? Peace, kindness, love, patience, presence, right? And so I just consciously choose to shift into something that feels better. So for me, it just comes down to, what is it that I want? Why am I alive? To drink it in. I don't know necessarily anymore that we're here on the earth as a lesson. I don't know that we're here on the earth anymore to pay off karmic debt. I don't know that we're here on the earth anymore, because this is a global classroom. Maybe all of those are right. Maybe none of those are right. What I do believe is that we're here on earth to enjoy our experience.
Oh, I
And
love that.
that's all that I know, that we get to enjoy our experience. And it gets to be delicious, and it gets to be pleasant, and it gets to be adventurous, and it gets to be peaceful, and it gets to be spiritual, and it gets to be, I think I said adventurous twice, but that's because that's how I like to live, in a state of adventure and exploration.
Right. So, PJ, can you talk to us about what you mean by the presence?
Yeah. It's funny because there's sort of two personalities in me, right? One is this like crazy person when I get on stage and I'm speaking on stage and I'm all excited, or I'm working one-on-one with my clients or in a group setting and I'm all excited like this, because I love that part. I love that excitement. I love that like enthusiasm. But then there's a part like before I got on the call with you that taps into this stillness, and not silence, but stillness. And I make a clear distinction between silence and stillness. Um, Stillness is this idea of no movement. And in the stillness, there's an awareness. And so if there's no movement, if there's one heartbeat or one movement somewhere, then all of everything feels it. Why? Because in stillness, any movement is felt everywhere. And so within a lot of major religions and psychological practices, people suggest and encourage you to be present. Well, just be present. Come back to the present moment. And that's beautiful. And there's so much value and truth in that, and so much wisdom there. And then when we come back to the present, we come back to our senses of sight and sound and taste and smell and touch and, all of these different senses that we can experience. But the problem is that if we come back to the present, being in the present moment is limiting, but being in the presence is liberating. And that's presence with a capital P. So what I mean by that is if I'm in the present moment, then I'm conscious of my senses, my taste, smell, touch, hearing, kinesthetic feelings, right? And some people even argue that we have up to 18 or 19 different senses. making a distinction between something that's sharp versus something that's soft, something that's hot versus something that's cold. And some just clump those into kinesthetic feelings. But the point is, you're limited by these things only, by whatever senses that you have and are currently experiencing the world from. And so that's limiting. But when I say, but being in the presence is liberating, what I'm talking about is being aware and connected to the life force or the energy that exists within all things. And the process of discovering that, I can walk you through it if you'd like, but it's this feeling of knowing that when I look out my window and I see a tree, that there's no separation between the tree and me. And we could say, no, there's this distance between me and the tree. And I would say, sure, that exists. And between you and I right now, Alina, there's a physical distance, right? But is there actually any difference, right? So when we start to look at what are we, and we start to realize that, and I'm just talking just purely like brain stuff right now, there's this awareness that we're the smallest particles brought together. We're smaller than, so if we look at the atoms, what's smaller than the atoms, the neutrons, the protons, the electrons, what's smaller than that? Quarks, what's smaller than that, right? So we could keep going down and down and down, getting smaller and smaller and smaller. But what we realize is that we're mostly space. We're mostly space. And that tree outside my window or those rocks outside my window, those are mostly space also. And the space between us is all space. And so when we start to settle out of our mind and physically into our body, where we start to shift our attention from our mind and our thinking and the mental chatter that goes on, and we shift it into the awareness of the presence of our body, and we start to feel the energy in our body, and we start to feel like sort of the energy outside of our body, we can then start to realize that, wait, there's energy in this space around me. And then when I look out and across the void between me and the tree or me and the rocks, I can realize that inside of each one of them is just space. And if there's mostly space in me and mostly space in them, there's space between us. The one thing that's the same is the space. And that's the one consistency. Because when the neutrons and the protons and the electrons start to fall apart after death, then what's left? The space. And what is in that space is a sense of consciousness, a sense of awareness. This is what I reference when I'm talking about presence, this consciousness, this awareness.
That's beautiful, PJ.
Thanks. Thank you.
So back to the point that you were making, that there is a difference between being present and being in the presence. It sounds as if that being present is kind of time bound, right? So when you say come back to the present, it means, stop worrying about the future, stop ruminating and regretting the past, come back to the present moment. So it seems to be a well-founded advice to come back to right where you are and experience, like you say, the feelings and all that come with being in the present. But it sounds as if what you're saying with being in the present it sounds a little bit more, prayer based. It sounds as if we're trying to come to this space where we kind of transcend our physicality and kind of connect with the space. Is that what you're saying? And is the best way to get there, would that be through meditation, prayer, being still?
So yes, I would say yes to everything that you're saying. And I would say, yes, absolutely. This could be more prayer based, or this could be more, or more spiritual in nature, but it doesn't have to be that, right? If we look at the quantum energy field from a scientific place, the quantum energy field is pure potential. And that's partially what presence is, right? Presence is even more than just the quantum energy field, but it's inclusive of that. And so if we look at that as, in this empty space, there's space for anything to be created. There's space for anything to exist. There's space for anything to arise. There's space for anything to happen. There's space for anything to be felt. And so it can be looked at from the scientific place where within the quantum energy field, there's the opportunity for the right pieces and parts to come together to form a human or a tree or a rock or a planet or a star. But there's also the void, the emptiness, the nothingness. So there's the everything, the possibility of everything, and there's the presence of nothing that gives the space for the everything to rise. And how is the best way to get to this? It depends on who you are. Some people get to this by going out in nature and just sitting still and just letting everything in their everyday life wash out of their brain. And they shift from the mental chatter back into the presence of their body. And then they start feeling their body. And then when they start feeling their body, they start feeling as if, there's some kind of connection or purity and purification that nature is then pouring into them, because there's now space since their mind is still. And so they feel like there's this them letting go and then nature pouring into them. So they realize this unity and this oneness, this connection. If you're a runner, you might experience it at some point through the process of a runner's high, where all of a sudden you are, if you're out running, and you sort of start to slip into this runner's high, where all of a sudden pain washes away. And there's this blissful feeling that comes over you. And there's this joy in the movement. And you lose yourself. You lose the small self to the pleasure, to the bliss, to the joy. And then you feel as if you're being pulled into the next step, pulled down the road, pulled down the path. And so there's an awareness of connection to the whole in that process. If you're an artist, sometimes it's you lose yourself in the painting or the drawing or the sculpting. And as you're doing that, or the pottery, and as you're doing that, again, everything just washes away. And there just becomes a unity and a oneness between the paint and the canvas and the brush and you, or the clay in your hands and the water and the tools. There just becomes this process where you and the clay, if you're throwing pottery, for example, or you're sculpting, where it's almost an act of making love, and not just the act of just physically making love, but the act of spiritually making love, like in Tantra, where you start to lose yourself and you lose your physical self into the union of the two souls. And then the union of the two souls loses themselves into the union of the universe, into the union of the energy of the presence of the quantum energy field, of the everythingness and nothingness simultaneously. And so what happens is the mind becomes still, or a part of the mind at least becomes still. You become aware of the stillness in your mind, even though your mind might be thinking. There's another part of your mind that you've moved into that's still and might be observing everything else. And so my mind could be in chaos, but I, the conscious me, could pull myself back and just observe the chaos. And from the observer, the place of being the observer, I see the chaos. I see my mind thinking and worrying about and struggling and trying to figure out and processing and what am I going to do? And asking myself all these questions and making all these statements. But if I pull myself out of that and I just watch that, the part that's observing is still. The part that's observing is not thrown off by what's going on. So I'm going to use a strange metaphor, okay? Jocko Willink is a Navy SEAL. And so it seems weird that I'm going from presence and love and connection and peacefulness and all of this, shifting over to a Navy SEAL. But it's a really great point. Jocko Willink is a Navy SEAL, and he's part of a team of guys that were boarding a ship. So he boards the ship with his team. And as I remember the story, They get to the top of the ship and they look around. The top of the ship doesn't look like how they were briefed. So they're like, okay, well, this doesn't look like what we expected once we got up here. So everybody just sort of froze, like, what do we do? Jocko stepped back. Now, I don't know that Jocko physically stepped back, but he did what I mentioned a moment ago about the chaos in your mind and stepping back from it and just observing it in that space of the stillness, the silence, more specifically the stillness. You can observe whatever's going on. You can observe the movement without being moved by the movement. And so he steps back. Again, I don't know if he physically steps back or mentally, psychologically withdraws from the confusion. And he looks around, and when he gets a feeling, he comes back into himself, whether he steps forward again or comes back into the chaos in the body and the mind and, the situation. And he said, we go that way. And because nobody else had any other ideas, everybody just followed him because that's what teams do. And so it supports my principle or my statement about no matter what the chaos is in your life, you can always pull back, step out of it for a moment and observe it and get some respite. And it's in the respite that you begin to experience the first tastes in that particular scenario or situation of presence. Was that clear? Did that make some sense?
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it's as if you kind of step back from the chaos, take stock of things and then try to figure out what the best solution is to the problem that you're facing or the chaos that you're in.
Yes. And if I may jump in for just a moment, right? It's not just trying to figure out what the best solution is, because the problem is now you're working your mind. Now you're remaining in chaos. You're remaining in movement. You're remaining linked in and tied to the struggle. So it's less about trying to figure it out because that's mental. That's a mental game. But when you remove yourself emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, even sometimes physically by stepping back, you're pulling yourself away from the chaos. You're pulling yourself out of the mind and the monkey mind and the madness and the chaos that's going on or the mental chatter that's going on. And you step back into this space of feeling. And it's not just an emotional feeling. In fact, it's much more of a kinesthetic feeling. And it's the kinesthetic feeling that is happening inside of the body and the mind simultaneously. There's this feeling of the empty space inside of you. There's this feeling of the awareness of the energy inside of your body. And then when you realize the energy inside your body, then there's an awareness of the energy outside of your body. Then there's an awareness of the similarity of that energy between me and the tree, the space between me and the tree. Then there's an awareness that the energy is also in the tree. So it's the same, it becomes the same energy that's in the tree that's in me and in the rock that's in me. And if that's the case, if we're the same, then the thing about that is there's no difference. There's only unity. There's only oneness. There's nothing forcing me or causing me or pulling me or drawing me. There's just presence. There's just stillness. There's just the isness. There's just the awareness of presence. And in that, you can then, if you need to, wait for a feeling or ask yourself, okay, what would I like to do? Or what is the next step? Or what does it feel like I should do next? Or you can just sit and bask and roll around in the deliciousness of that stillness, of that peace, of that, what's the word for it? Bliss is so overused, of the joy of floating in innocence, where there just is an awareness of awareness.
Why do you think being in the present is so important?
Because it gives you respite from the chaos of your mind. It gives you peace and solitude when you might be struggling, because it reignites the compassion and generosity and kindness and love in you, because it reconnects the love that you have inside of you naturally that wants to be shared, because it creates a balance and an understanding that other people are struggling, and maybe we have the ability to create space for them to express themselves in the way that they need to or want to, because it allows us to realize that we're not alone in the universe, and that we've never been separated from what I would refer to as God, or whatever that consciousness is, because it allows us to realize that we are whole and not fragmented or broken.
Yeah. And I think that's it's a really important. I maybe the word is ability, right? Or it's a really important quality to have to be able to come to the presence, and then realize that we are all connected somehow, and that there is a common goal that we as humanity share. And get an idea of what the best, with the example of the Navy SEAL, what's the best way forward.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's really beautiful what you just said. But I want to come back to, a lot of things that we see in the world, right? So everyone will have the idea of the best way to do something, right? Or,
yes,
in pulling back from the chaos and then saying this is the way we do it. I mean, from a practical sense, or even a mentally, it makes sense, which is why so many powerful leaders, generals in war would pray, right? Because that prayer takes them out of that moment for the time being, right? It helps them connect with God, or, something that is larger than they are. And then it gives them the courage, the bravery, the insight, whatever they need, to then continue the conversation or the the plan. But everyone who does that is definitely going to come, almost certainly, will have a different idea of how we're going to solve the political crisis in the US, for example, right now, right? What's your take on that?
What's my take on what piece of that? Because there's a couple of different ways I feel like I can go with it.
Okay.
Is there a specific piece that you're looking at or wondering about?
Yeah. How do we, if we are connected with each other, it doesn't provide any solution to the direction in which we should go as a community, as a society, right? So how would we navigate those differences?
When we find presence and we recognize that we are connected, it creates a space inside of us that allows for differences and honors differences and recognizes that people are just struggling with where they are and with who they are. And it gives us the capacity to have compassion for them and not fight against them. And when we have the capacity to be compassionate with them, it also, by default, gives us the ability to listen to them and to communicate with them so that they can get out what they're feeling, what they're experiencing. And if they can get that out, and then we can talk about what's bothering them, then it gives us the ability to come to a resolution that works for everybody. And so many times we want to do that from our brains. And what happens is we wrestle and we struggle with what's the right thing to say and the right thing to do, and who's the right person to talk to, and who's actually right in the room. Am I right? Are you right? Who should we listen to? And that creates problems. So you look at somebody like His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, right? And he goes into, he is fascinated by science. And so he goes into conferences, I was going to say exposiums. I don't think that's a real word. I think I made that up. But he goes into like science conferences and is sometimes invited to sit with the other scientists and just listens, just listens, just listen. And while they're all like sort of talking about their findings and their discoveries and sort of debating what's going on and really trying to struggle about like this piece versus that piece, because he's sitting in the presence, what happens is he starts to see beyond the veil of all of the moving parts and all of the pieces that people think are important. And he's able to articulately ask a question about one particular situation that then helps everybody go, like, take their blinders off and stop seeing from their own perspective and stop seeing with the color of their glasses, but instead to open up and go, oh, wow, hold on. So there is a commonality here. Oh, wow. Right. We hadn't thought about that as being the same. We were so worried about the different pieces that we weren't looking for the similarity. So if you find yourself in a difficult situation politically or with, somebody like you were talking about the military leaders earlier, or within a relationship between husbands and wives or boyfriends and girlfriends, or between parents and kids, or between colleagues at work or bosses and employees or neighbors, right? If you find yourself in conflict, do we want to stay in conflict? Do we want to like sort of duke it out and hash it out and talk it out until we actually like I've made my point and you've made your point? What are we making our points for? The whole point of making our points is so that I can be right and I can get what I want. Or if it's a higher level, the whole point of me sharing what I'm feeling and you sharing what you're feeling is so that we can find a resolution, right? And that's the higher level. But even the higher level is, instead of fighting against each other, what if we're fighting for each other and saying, how are we the same? Let's start there. How are we connected? What's true? Let's start with the truth and build out from the truth, instead of live in the chaos and fight through the chaos to get to what we think is true or right. What if we just start with peacefulness? What if we start with love? What if we start with kindness? But even peacefulness and even love are just outgrowths from presence. They're the plants that grow from the soil of the earth, right? And the presence is more the soil of the earth that then also nurtures the plant. And so when we come from that place of presence, that place of stillness, what we do is we give space for the other person to be frustrated and upset. We allow them to be able to speak into what they're experiencing without our resistance or need to defend ourselves or our need to be right, but rather from a place of, wow, that's really interesting. Can you help me understand more so I can connect more with you? And then once I connect more, I go, oh, I understand where you're coming from. I understand your struggle. Wow, if I was in your space, I would probably feel the same way. Now that there's an awareness and a connection, right? Now we can move forward. I mean, think about it like this. Have you ever talked to somebody or had somebody talk to you, and you have somebody and you say something and they go, yes, you're right. You get it. That's exactly how I'm feeling, right? You get me. Why can't my boyfriend or my husband get me? You get me, right? Why can't the military get this? Why can't the politicians get this, right? Why you get it? Why can't they get it, right? And so what that's what that's suggesting is that people want to be gotten. They want to be understood. They want to be connected with. And so, that being the case, why not just initiate dialogue and conversation and connections and decision making from that place of presence? Where you go, okay, I'm in the presence now, and this is the situation that we have. What feels like the right thing to do? What is going to honor what we think is right in this moment? And how do we make sure that all the parts or all the people are honored and connected and implemented and utilized correctly to create the full picture. What it does is it helps us to find all the individual jigsaw pieces and put them in the right places so that we make the perfect image.
Is
But
that
instead, yeah, go ahead.
sorry,
No,
PJ. That
yeah,
that
you're
was
perfect.
beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Well, I was just going to say, does that depend on everyone being open to dialogue, right? And everyone in a society or organization being willing to come to the presence?
No, I'm an idealist, and that would be an ideal situation, but it
Right.
doesn't depend on that. It depends on one person willing to connect with the presence and create space for another person to vent and express and get out and be felt or understood and have compassion shared and given to them. And then once they are able to move through their chaos and their struggle and their hurt, and they know that somebody is able to connect or understand them and make peace with them, right? Then we can move on to connecting on some of the more basic physical, psychological, human levels. And then if we do that and we teach them that process through connecting with them repeatedly that way, now they start to do the same. And then they share that with their friends or their partners or their bosses or their colleagues. And then when those people get that feeling, then the next set of people. So it just spreads. It just spreads. It doesn't require all of us. It just requires one person to take the step. The simple fact that I can connect with presence and I can articulate it and teach it to my students, or I have the opportunity that you're giving me here today to talk to your audience. And this recording it's going to live on the internet forever, or as long as it does. And it's going to touch somebody or touch hopefully a lot of people. And those people will then go out and touch other people. It only takes one person, but it is an evolution. And when one person is growing and sharing and helping others grow, we have to remember that new babies are being born every day into situations that might be chaos filled. So there's sort of this balance that occurs, right? This yin and yang of, oh, some of these people are coming to a space of peacefulness, the space of presence, the space of kindness and compassion, while others may be being born into situations that are going to be very, very challenging and they're going to struggle. So it sort of creates this constant balance, this constant tension that gives us the opportunity to choose. Do we want to be in chaos and struggle and hurt? Or do we want to be in joy and peace and presence and kindness and love? It's a choice. Just like when my friends ask me that at lunch, why aren't you angry and upset? Because that doesn't feel good. And since I'm skillful in my mind, since I understand that if something doesn't feel good, I have the ability to shift it inside of my being, inside of my heart, inside of my mind. If I have that ability and I don't want to feel yucky, then I just shift into what I want to feel instead. So it's a choice. So it teaches me, I teach myself to become empowered, and then I can teach other people to do the same. And at some point, somebody's going to hear this and they're going to be an educator of parents. And some parents are going to come and they're going to learn this same kind of idea, and then they'll teach their children, and the world becomes a little bit better that way. So it's a process. His Holiness the Dalai Lama was asked by one of his guards and one of his assistants or servants one day. He said, Kundun was the name of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Kundun, how long will it take? Meaning, how long will it take for all of the world to shift into compassion, to shift into a space of knowing and love? And His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, I have never known. When he says, I have never known, he's the 13th incarnation of the Dalai Lama meaning the ocean of wisdom. And so the belief is that his soul or spirit has been in the position of the Dalai Lama or in the position of an enlightened being previous to this, and that he is living from a space of bodhisattva. And bodhisattva is this idea of once he attains enlightenment, he doesn't shift and go into nirvana or the heaven-like space. He chooses to continue to be born over and over and over until all sentient beings are liberated and set free. And so when His Holiness the Dalai Lama was asked, Kundin, how long will it take? And his response was, I have never known. He's talking about through lifetimes. He's never known how long it will take for everyone to shift to this space. But he didn't say it won't happen or I'm scared it will never happen. He just said, I've never known, meaning
That's
I don't know
beautiful.
how long it will take. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that's beautiful, PJ. So, well, I think we kind of know what you hope to see for the future with what you're teaching about the present. How can our audience reach you if they are interested in what you're teaching?
They can reach me through, very simply, they can just simply email me if they want, pj at pjswisdom.com. Again, pj at pjswisdom.com. You can find me on social media under the PJ's Wisdom or just PJ's Wisdom. And YouTube right now it's PJ Dixon, but it'll go back to PJ's Wisdom soon. And, pjswisdom.com. And if there's any shy guys out there or any STEM men or women that know shy guys, I'm creating a program called the Hero Project for men that are shy to develop their level of confidence and come back to that space where they will have the confidence that they need to make the impact on the world that they want to have and create the relationships that they want. And that's very simply heroproject.pjswisdom.com. It's really super simple. So they can find me anywhere.
That's
and I make
great,
myself
PJ.
as accessible as possible. Thank you.
Yes, and of course, all those links will be in the show notes below.
Okay.
But it's always good for the guest, for you to invite our audience to connect.
Please. Yeah, that would be delicious and wonderful. Let's have a conversation.
Sounds great, PJ. PJ, thank you for coming on the show. I think we've learned so much from you about what coming to the presence mean. And we want to wish you the very best in your projects, in what you're doing, in your teaching, and your outreach. So thank you, PJ. It's been a real pleasure.
It's my pleasure and my honor. And thank you so much. And I genuinely hope that you and your audience have gleaned some deliciousness this morning. And if people have questions, just shoot me an email.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Heart-Centered Life podcast. Make sure to visit our website, www.elinaboyd.com, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Stitcher, or via RSS, so you'll never miss a show. If you found value in the show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. Be sure to check out some of our programs on how to cultivate, create, communicate, and inspire others from a heart-centered space. Tune in next week for our next episode where we will help you find a place of deep happiness so that you can meet the world's deep hunger and watch miracles unfold.